guy.
I can't imagine.
Morning,
how
ladies and
smart he
gentlemen.
is.
It is the appointed time, and so I think it is time to start. I would like to start by asking Mr. Kazmierski to lead us in a pledge of the flag.
Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I believe we will do roll call.
We'll start with Washoe County first. Marcia Burke-Bigler, Chair.
Here.
Kitty Jung, Vice Chair, is absent. Von Hartung.
Here.
Jeannie Herman.
Here.
Bob Lucy. Here. County Manager John Slaughter.
Here.
Assistant District Attorney Paul Liparelli.
Here.
I'm Nancy Parent, County Clerk. You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you, City of Reno.
Here.
Here. Thanks. Sorry.
Here.
Here. City of Sparks.
Mayor Marquini, absent. Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Here.
Councilmembers Rapp.
Here.
Lawson. Here. Ivy. Absent. Smith. Absent. Thank you.
Washoe County School District.
Trustee Frankel. Trustee McClary. Present. Trustee Rosenberg.
Here.
Trustee Ruggiero. Trustee Smith. Trustee Taylor.
I'm here.
President Nate.
Thank you. I would like to ask everybody to take a moment of silence for Mayor Sheevy's family in the loss of their father. So let's please do that. Thank you very much. We need to remember her, as this is a tough time for her and her family. Okay. Madam Clerk, are you running this or am I running this? Public comment.
Thank you. Christy Chakarolu.
Good morning. My name is Christy Chakarolo, and I'm with Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful. I am proud to represent the organization that had 660 volunteers out on Saturday and removed over 120 tons of trash from 18 different sites, including 18 abandoned vehicles, thanks to the help of the Nevada National Guard. We really appreciate their support. I am here today to talk about the river, though. The river is something that KTMB has been working to clean up for more than 10 years now, and we're all starting to feel a little insane at Keep Truckee Meadows Beautiful, as the definition of insanity means doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. It continues to get worse. And so we're working with our partners to develop a Truckee River Corridor management plan. It turns out this region does not have a management plan for our river. And so we feel like it's high time to make that happen. And we're partnering with the Nevada Land Trust to put those pieces together. And I'm here today to just let you know that that is happening behind the scenes and to ask you for your help and support as we go through this effort. We do have staff from City of Reno and Washoe County on board, and we'd welcome other staff as well. We're going to be moving forward focusing on phase 1 of our river plan, which addresses primarily the section of the City of Reno, and then we'll be moving on to phase 2. But we've secured the support of the National Park Society, as well as the Western Regional Water Commission and the Truckee River Fund. And as we move forward, we're going to need to secure more funds and additional staff. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, just be aware that this is happening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
I have no other public comment.
Good. We'll close public comment and bring it back to the board. And the next issue is the presentation and discussion of possible direction to staff regarding the report on the economic planning impacts EPIC. Mr. Restrepo. Mr. Kazmierski.
Very good, Madam Chair. Mike Kazmierski with EDON. I will lead things off with a short intro and then introduce John to take the meat of the subject. First off, you notice the big red up there, it's interim report. This report is really Not quite done yet. We still have some numbers we're tweaking, but I can tell you after 6 months of coordinated effort with, you'll see the agencies, over 30 different individuals participated. Every government entity in the region participated, and really it's that kind of economic development collaboration and cooperation that's needed to continue the great things that are happening in this region. So I want to thank you on behalf of your staff and your involvement in this effort, because really what it allows us to do is talk with one voice. And that really, if you remember back to the IBM Smarter Cities piece, that was important to do on the economic development side. And really what was happening as we started to talk about growth in the fall, in fact this study started over 6 months ago, what actually happened was there were projections that were starting to come out from everywhere. You had state projections, you had state demographer, you had Dieter, you had the group that supports the legislature, others, all coming out with different numbers, state numbers, local numbers, and we really said what we need is, first of all, to get together and develop a single set of numbers that we can all agree to. We brought all the groups together, and that set of numbers now is something that we're using to determine, okay, what does this growth do to our region, so that before it happens, we can actually get out in front of it and solve the problems before they occur. And that really is the intent of the effort. Let's figure out, we have a pretty good idea there's significant growth coming. What do we do now? Do we sit back and wait until we have huge problems to resolve, or can we project those problems as a group up here, as a team, and allocate resources and time and energy to get the problem worked out before it really becomes significant? So that really is the purpose of the effort, and I really want to thank the staff and all the people involved in this, because this has been a pretty significant effort to date, and it's not quite done. So with that as a warm-up, let me jump into the background. We have a lot of growth. I think most people know that. In addition to Switch and Tesla, nearly 100 other company announcements over the last 3.5 years. The impacts are going to be pretty significant. Most people feel it already. If you want to buy a house now, it's a whole lot different than it was just 2 years ago, even 1 year ago. If you want to rent, prices are higher. Things are changing. There's more traffic. You're starting to feel the very beginning of what this growth will mean for the region. And again, I mentioned all the varying projections, and let's kind of coordinate our efforts there. And this is the public, nonprofit, and private coordinated effort, and that is pretty important. And finally, the technical committee, which we had meet.
Sorry. New phone. I didn't even know.
I turned off. Finally, the technical committee, which has been meeting every single week since October. So it just shows you the kind of energy that's been put into this by all the participants. This is something many people have seen before. It is unprecedented growth projected for the region. This is scaled down to just the MSA. This is where the bulk of the growth will occur. So from an MSA perspective, you get a feel for why the lion's share of it will occur in Reno-Sparks, but the study area is actually a 5-county region, the area that really encompasses the entire area. And you see where we averaged about 1.2% growth, and now we're popping or projecting 4.7, and we're pretty close to that already. Last year was 3.3. So it just gives you an idea. We have the Tesla growth, the historic growth, and then the growth that we are involved in bringing to the region. So a lot of growth is happening, and again, a pretty good reason for the effort. This just shows you from an EDON perspective the announced assisted companies over the last several years, and you can see the trend. The line at the bottom was the 5-year average, and then just each year the bar goes higher and higher, and these numbers do not include Tesla. So it just kind of gives you a feel for where we're going when we start overlaying on top of this the numbers for Tesla, Switch, and other major projects in the area. When you say, okay, well, things are going to quiet down now that we've had all this growth, and I tend to disagree. These are all pending announcements. These companies will announce in the next 3 months to 4 months. We're in the final phases of closing the deals. They've signed real estate, so you're talking about another 1,000 jobs there. And what we like about this is they're fairly small companies. And you bring in a small company, you add diversity to the region, and it helps people find different kinds of jobs. It's not just one type of job. This is a little scary. We have 140 prospects in our prospect list that we're working with at varying levels. Like any sales organization, what you want to do is you want to work your prospect list, and the ones that start percolating to the top require more time, energy, and effort. These are percolated to the top. We're in the finals on all of these, and when we're in the finals with a company, we win more than 70% of them. So when you look at that list and say, okay, let's just do rough math here, 70% of 10,000 is 7,000, that means we could win another Tesla, essentially, in the next 12 to 18 months. On top of that is Tesla, on top of that is Switch. So when we talk about growth, it's coming. And so the more we can do to prepare for it, the better. Some of the assumptions for the study, and I touched on some of these already. What we want to talk about is that growth area, the 5-county region. We're going to affect everything around us. I mean, even if it's just, 500 jobs in Lyon County, when you look at their percentage of growth, that's a big number. So you look at the entire region. We use conservative numbers. You'll see some of the numbers in the report tend to be less than some of the numbers that we talk about at EDON. We're looking at our pipeline and what's happening. The report and the group, in order to reach consensus, have gone to a conservative number estimate. My sense is we may and very likely will exceed that number. But again, in order to get everyone on the same sheet of music, we've kind of come around a set of numbers that we're using for the report. And then the members of the committee. And I'll tell you, this has been a very collaborative effort. It has taken time, but it's been a great opportunity to work together. Much like the group here today, this region works together, especially in the economic development area, better than any other community I've seen, and I want to thank you for that. This is just another testament to that collaboration. I would like to, where are they? They're up there somewhere. The regional planning group, Jeremy Smith, I think, is here, and I don't know, and Kim. I want to thank them especially because I can tell you that we would not be this far along in the report without all the analysis they did. All the maps in the report are done by that team, and their effort has been huge in supporting the overall project. So I want to thank them for that especially. And then the scope of work, we're looking at 3 scenarios we address: low, medium, and high, a 5-year period. We want to just not pie in the sky it, but keep it in a realistic 5-year horizon. We're going to have to come together in 12 to 18 months, maybe 24 months, to look at this again and say, okay, here's what we projected, here's where we are now, how do we tweak where we're going? And so it's really a work in progress. We did collate data from across the state. GOED was involved, DETA was involved. We used numbers from everywhere. This has been a pretty exhaustive effort. And then finally, we're fortunate to have John Restrepo and his organization do the math on this for us and help us. He's done these kind of economic impact reports before. You can notice his client list there at the bottom of the slide, pretty impressive. And he's been doing this for over 30 years. He knows his business, and we're fortunate to have him really lead the team as we bring these numbers together. So with that, as kind of a warm-up, let me introduce John Restrepo to continue on the report. Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. Restrepo.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, John Restrepo with RCG Economics in Las Vegas. First, I have to say I'm shocked to see the county and the city sitting together. We've never seen that in Las Vegas, by the way. But anyway, this just says how things are. They're a little different in the South. Anyway, thank you, Mike. Mike was kind of our spiritual advisor in this project. We feel very fortunate to be involved here, and the things that are happening in Northern Nevada are just simply amazing in terms of the types of economic activity that are coming and the level of effort. To me, the cooperative effort of all the agencies on the EPIC group. And again, I want to reiterate what Mike said about the folks at Truckee Meadows. Thank you, Jeremy, Kim. Unbelievable work with these guys. Great working with them. And the whole team, the whole technical committee was good. All the nerdy numbers persons that got together and kind of struggled through all these numbers. But anyway, let's get started. What I want to do to kind of set the stage is where we are today and why we're so excited about where we're heading. And, obviously there's opportunities and challenges, right, with growth. But let me show you kind of where we started. I like to show this chart, generally try and scare people a little bit. This is a picture of the job loss and recovery of the last 10 recessions before this Great Recession. That's the percent loss of jobs from the peak jobs to the depth, the percent loss. Those two big ones were 1948, 1957, for those who are interested. That's what we used to call our Nevada, basically V-style recoveries. Remember, we thought that was our birthright. This is what happened in this one. This is the latest recession. It's been longer, more pronounced, and slower coming out of it than we've seen in the past. The nature of this recession was more akin to the Great Depression and the normal recession that you normally see. Even the U.S. Took a pretty big hit. So based on this, I like to set the stage because it kind of helps us get through where we're heading now from here. But this is what we're getting to. But the numbers are looking pretty decently now. So when we take it a little deeper and we look now at taxable retail sales, they're recovering very nicely. Very nicely. Again, I like to say, thank goodness for the kindness of strangers, all those tourists that come to our state and spend their hard-earned money here and buy a lot of our goods and services. And there's a recovery happening in residential spending, resident spending as well. So that's a great sign. So the sales taxes are coming back pretty decently. Gaming revenues, not so exciting. This is when we take Baccarat out, because Baccarat kind of throws numbers around pretty wildly, and we start looking at just the non-Baccarat revenues, which is largely driven by slots. Gaming revenues across the state are improving slightly, but they're not improving at the same rate that they declined. Changing spending habits, we still have a bit of a constraint on discretionary spending. Kids, younger folks are not sitting in front of slot machines a long time, so there's a lot of things that are happening there. So we can't really depend on gaming, in my opinion, to carry the day. It'll be an important part of the economy, but we have to look at other economic diversification, other types of economic activities. This is the visitor volumes for Reno. Returning slowly, but we still have a way to go to get back to the 06 levels. Housing affordability. It's a little bit of a challenge. This is the rate of price increase. This comes from the folks at the UNR, Brian Bonifant over there at UNR. As you can see, the red lines are the median price home. The blue line is the rate of growth. We're starting to see some slowdown in the rate of growth in pricing, but housing prices is an issue. The cost of housing is a particular issue that we need to answer and address and figure out what we can do to provide more housing and more ability for residential construction as the economy evolves and we attract all these jobs. Now let's look at sort of the overall population and job situation. Here's the headline rate for unemployment, 7.5% at the state level. In what we call our study area, the five-county area combined. They're very close. The study area is about 7.5%. The whole of Nevada, 7.5%. So we're tracking pretty closely. Just as a point of reference, though, we don't have the chart, but just as a point of reference, this is, as I said before, it's the headline unemployment rate you see in the paper. It's also called the U3 rate that the Fed's put out. There's a series of other unemployment rates. The top rate is the U6 rate. That U6 rate is still pretty high in Nevada, about 15%. Now that includes the scourge workers, that includes forced part-time workers, that includes a variety of other folks that are what they call marginally attached to the workforce. They may not even be looking for a job. They're not interested in working. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. The reality is probably somewhere in between the 7 and the 15 at the state level. They don't produce these numbers, unfortunately, for the metro levels. But so we're still coming out of this recession as some of those indicators show. This, to me, is some of the more exciting news that we have finally starting to see an increase in the rate in the average weekly wage after we adjust for inflation. That's what the real word means. So after we adjust for inflation, look what the blue line is doing. That's Reno Sparks. We're finally starting to see wages go up, which is critically important to consumer confidence and spending and all these sorts of things. The red line is the state of Nevada. It's lagging. Las Vegas is kind of flat. Reno's doing much better overall compared to Vegas and in the overall state in terms of the average weekly wage. This one's also exciting news for Reno Sparks, the MSA area. This is the average hours worked per week. Some of this data does not get produced at the county, it gets produced at the MSA level. That's why we have to report it that way. So So otherwise we would have reported for each of the 5 counties. But look at the little bit of a spike we're seeing in the average weekly hours worked. We're still going to need to get to that 37 to 38 hours, which was at the beginning of the recession, but that's a pretty big spike just in the last few months in Reno. The state, not so much at this point, still kind of lagging a little bit. Big news there. Okay, on the terms of what we decided to do, as Mike mentioned, we looked at 3 growth scenarios. The top growth scenario, I believe, during the 5-year period was about 55,000 people, a little over 55,000 jobs. And then the other one was the mid scenario we call scenario B, which we're using in here, about 52,000 jobs during the period. And the low scenario is about 45,000. Numbers are moving a little bit. We're still tweaking them a bit. We're always finding a little thing that a little bit of what we can do here and a little do there to improve. But I think we're pretty much settled on this at this point. We're just kind of tweaking a little bit. As Mike mentioned, this is the Tesla. We don't have to go through all of these details. Right now, 6,500 potential jobs, and then another 7,500 indirect. This is the full-time operational jobs. There's several other thousand jobs in construction that will come during the first few years. The big news, really, the other things you guys have seen, I think, from all the media accounts, is the latest account from Tesla, the announcement of the Powerwall, the $3,000 battery for homes and businesses that they're planning on rolling out. That's an incredibly big part of the story here of why Tesla is going to be a bigger deal than we thought. It's just going to go beyond the car batteries. So that's a real important announcement that Elon Musk made last week, and you guys are very aware of that. So as Mike mentioned, we have a 5-county study area. We have Washoe, Lyon, Carson, Douglas, Story, and I think I got everyone. This is our 5-county area. Maps put together, as I said, by Truckee Meadows folks. We then took those 5 counties and broke them down into 18 sub-county areas, what we call epic zones. These were determined by the committee and based on natural boundaries, economic and demographic relationships, business activity, transportation networks, and broke down those five counties into these 18 what we call epic zones, as they're called. And then the map on the right is sort of a blow-up of the Reno-Sparks area. These are the epic zones. There are 18 of them. There's 10 in Washoe County, 1 in Story, 2 in Carson, 2 in Douglas, and 3 in Lyon. And these are just names that we came up with the committee, just different names everyone was comfortable with that kind of sort of describes the zones. And so under scenario B, as I mentioned earlier, there's about 52,000 jobs coming, 42,000 in population, 17,000 home households. So the question may come to your mind, how can we have more job growth and population growth? Because of the changing labor force participation rate, because of the quick influx of jobs, putting more people back to work that are already here unemployed. So you could have job growth higher than population, primarily because of a dropping unemployment rate, a rising labor force participation rate, combined with kids coming out of high school going into the workforce population, as well as economic migrants. So it doesn't happen long term. It happens during these little spurts of growth. So that's what we're seeing here. It's kind of anomaly. It appears to be an anomaly. It really isn't when you look at the nature of what's going to be happening over the next 5 years, or during the 5-year study period. Here's our job numbers. What we did here, and this is a great map that Jeremy and Kim and the folks put together, we looked at the darker the area, the more concentration of jobs. So as you can see here, there's basically 4, and let me get my notes here, there are 4 zones that are going to contain almost half the job growth, at least under this scenario B. Scenario A and then scenario C have different numbers, but they kind of generally follow the same pattern. So the 4 zones are what we call Sparks Industrial, North Reno, Southeast Reno, Story County. Those 4 together comprise about 26,000 jobs out of the 52,000 jobs we're projecting between 2015 and 2019. And you'll be able to refer those numbers to your map. So that's where the concentration are. The darker the numbers, areas, the higher concentration of jobs, as you can see. That's on the job front. Now, if we look at the companion, which is the population, here's where I just talked about. And then there's 3 other zones that are kind of notable as well. Zone 4, 7, and 10, downtown Reno, southwest Reno, and south Washoe are going to see, moderate, decent level of jobs as well. On the population front, again, the darker the color, the more concentration number of folks, or number of residents. You can see where they are. And in this case, it's going to be zones 5, 9, and 10. North Reno, North Washoe, and South Washoe is going to constrain about half of the population growth, 20,000 out of the 42,000, just a little under half. The rest of the population will be spread out, as we say, in zones 3, which is Sparks Suburban, zone 6, West Reno, zone 7, Southwest Reno, zone 8, Southeast Reno, and zone 12, Carson. You can see those as well by different level, different lighter blue, where the concentrations are. Here's what the numbers I just mentioned. So as you can see, we're going to be seeing some decent amount of growth over the next 5 years here under this scenario. It gets even higher under scenario A, which is kind of the aggressive scenario, I guess, and then scenario C, which is a little lower. It all depends on what the assumptions are, how conservative you want to be, how quickly does Tesla actually staff up. All these things come into play. How much of the spin-off effects of Tesla come into the economy, how quickly that multiplier effect goes through, all of these things, and how fast the natural growth. How quickly will some of Mike's jobs come? What if they slow down? So we're trying to balance all these issues in terms of trying to get a realistic estimate of where we're heading. That's why we thought it was a good idea to work in a range of 3 different numbers so we can track this. And again, Mike made a very critical point. This is not a static document. It should not be a static process. You folks should, and your teams and your staff should be looking at this every 18 months to 24 months and updating, changing, moving, and doing it even sooner if you need be. Keep it a living process. It's really critical for infrastructure planning and a variety and school planning and all those other things that they go with this. So as Mike mentioned, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. We'll open up for questions. These are all the members of the ECA committee. I can't tell you, we could not have done this at all. A consultant, our third-party consultant could not have done this as cleanly and as quickly as this happened without the proactive and positive involvement of all the folks in these organizations. We had a lot of great feedback. There was not a lot of, showboating or any of that sort of thing. Everyone just wanted the right numbers. Everyone worked very closely together. And again, I want to thank, the folks at Truckee Meadows, the folks at the RTC, who were pretty good. Jeff Hardcastle, the state demographer, was incredibly helpful setting kind of the stage with some of his forecasts, and the folks at UNR and a variety of other, and GoEd was helpful, Bob Potts at GoEd, the economist at GoEd. So we really had a really good technical team that was part of this, the bigger group working on this. We're still finalizing a few things. We're still working on the fiscal impact, revenue impact chapter, the public sector chapter. We're kind of wrapping that up right now. We're still tweaking a few things, but I'd say we're probably at the 95% complete stage at this point. Anyway, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Restrepo. Do we have any questions? No question? Oh, Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. In the studies, was there a discussion with regards to in our ability to meet this unprecedented growth, what the biggest threats were to hindering the growth?
Right. We sort of dabble at that. We decided to do at this point was provide a high-level overview of the potential, and I think what would address your question with the potential revenue, public sector revenue sources, of revenues that are going to come from this growth. But that being said, we did not discuss the fiscal costs. So yes, these folks are going to generate taxes, but there's also service costs related to this. The committee felt that they're going to deal with that now that they have some understanding of the magnitude of the growth, the number of jobs and population growing, the revenues potentially that they're going to produce from a public sector standpoint, the tax revenues and those sorts of things. How do we then now do the cost side? What are the public service costs? What are the fire, police, schools, healthcare? All these things are going to come with that. So each of the agencies, so we're going to look at that from now and start developing the capital budgeting process as part of this assignment. So we just set the overall kind of framework with the revenues.
Was there any infrastructure?
Well, part of that is the infrastructure as well, yeah. What I call socioeconomic and physical infrastructure issues will now be dealt with. Now we have a number to look at in terms of the revenue production of all this growth and how quickly it's going to come and where it's going to go. That was the critical part, just kind of setting the stage, but where everything's going, so everyone can start doing their planning at this point.
And when will that information be coming back to us?
I'm not sure, maybe I need to address how each of the entities are going to put their plans together.
Mike Kazmersky, John is exactly right. This is an overview effort. We're trying to identify not just how much the impact will occur and when it'll occur, but where it'll occur. And what that does is it allows all the agencies in the region to take that data and then decide, okay, I'm in North Sparks, what does that mean? It allows the RTC to say, okay, well, what is this? If you notice, a lot of the population growth is north. What does that do to our transportation system, since we hadn't projected that in the past? So now they're taking the data and running it through their models, which will allow for the understanding of the impacts. What does that impact on transportation? What does that impact on service requirements? What does that impact on school requirements? And then that will then generate individual organizational assessments that will be a follow-on to say, okay, because of the report, we see where we need X number more schools, for example, or we need to widen this road because, there are a lot more people going to be on it than what we projected. So what we want to do is provide the data that then is used by all the agencies in the region to help them do their analysis. It also will give them some fiscal understanding of, okay, we've got bigger bills here, but, oh, by the way, this growth is going to help us pay some of that. So the timing is a concern. How we do it, we didn't want to get in there and be too involved in each of the different groups because they have different ways to analyze the data. So it was really more of a data layout.
Thank you.
And
Ms.
I
Stewart?
failed to mention, the data now has been provided from the different scenarios by Jeremy Smith to the RTC to run the travel demand model, at least to begin that process to see the magnitude of the impacts on some portions of the infrastructure. So this is just a first step in a kind of a long process that's got to be very proactively done by all the entities involved.
Ms. Stewart?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was great. I was just wondering for Mr. Kazmierski, is there an anticipated actual phase 2 under your umbrella, or is it, as you said, each agency is going to go do its own thing? And if they are going to do their own thing, is there a time frame to come back together with, at a similar time frame, or is everyone on a different timeline?
I think everyone's on a different timeline, in part because the sense of urgency may be different depending on what agency you are. For example, the school district might have a tighter timeline than, say, Washoe County. And so that timeline is going to drive the urgency for the organization to put resources behind their planning efforts. I can tell you from an EDON perspective, when you talk about impacts, our greatest impact, in our view, is our workforce needs. So we have totally shifted our planning efforts, and our strategic plan, in fact, addresses this on how do we meet the needs of these employers from an employee perspective. We have got to have the employees here to meet their needs, or we're going to have problems. So we have worked, from an organizational perspective, we're using these numbers and this data to start planning in a way that helps us meet those needs.
So that's for you, and I guess I'm thinking about the water, sewer, roads, schools. So is there a thought about bringing this back together? I mean, this was very helpful having this in a condensed presentation. I mean, we did something like this, 2 meetings ago, where we had sort of a snapshot on where we are. But I didn't know it was no phase 2 of this study, right?
There's no phase 2 that would really drill down as deep, because every organization is going to drill down at the level that they're comfortable with the database that they need in order to get their numbers. So at this point, at that level of drill down, there's no phase 2, but there is a plan to come together in about 18 months and say, okay, we projected this, here's what happened, and here's our new projection. And it allows for kind of a 18-month update so we go through this process, we can give the regional agencies better, updated, more current data.
So some reality testing.
Yes.
And I guess I would just, to my colleagues, just wonder about the usefulness of any kind of comprehensive relook, before 18 months. So something to think about as we're here today.
Mr. Lucy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kazmierski, thank you so much for coming this morning. I have a couple questions for you. Do you have any concerns currently with the industrial and commercial land availability within Washoe County at this time?
Well, certainly within Washoe County, we have concerns. Within the region and the study area, TRI helps us meet some of the larger manufacturing, more heavy manufacturing requirements. But within the county, we're running out of industrial space.
So our
We know that.
our land availability is short.
In the long term, we will need to address that, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lucy. Mr. McKenzie.
Excuse me, could I quickly jump in to address that too? Because we're having the same problem in Southern Nevada. The LVGEA, the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, hired us last year to look at the whole issue of employment lands in the valley, where, as you guys know, the valley is totally surrounded by federal land ownership. There's been a big push, a resurgence again, like we saw during the boom, of residential home builders trying to get land rezoned from commercial to residential, primarily in the industrial side. And so we were retained to look at the whole industrial situation through 2040. Actually, we're looking at where all the land is being allocated, what are the land use patterns, and how is it going. There are some concerns in Southern Nevada, and I think up here as well, that industrial land is getting increasingly more and more expensive. And that becomes an economic growth disincentive for companies that are trying to come here or to Nevada in general. We've gotten to the point in Southern Nevada, for example, the industrial land in the Las Vegas Valley is more expensive than you see in the Inland Empire in California. So industrial rents are higher. And so that's a concern. And so we always have to remember, you need to have a very healthy industrial land sector to support a healthy economy. That's a very critical key piece of this. So looking at your land use patterns, looking at zoning decisions, looking at what you can do to preserve industrial land is pretty critical. I'll provide Mike and the EPIC committee the report that we produce. It's a public report, and you can maybe get some of the ideas that we developed there of how to do a kind of an employment land policy, a proactive employment land policy to preserve those lands.
Thank you, Mr. Lucy. Thank you, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you for the report, and while things look bright in the report, my question always is, what can we do to screw it up? And you've heard me say several times that our jobs and our ability to provide a skilled labor force and our infrastructure are the two things that I think will head it off. At what point is our infrastructure going to impair further growth for you to gather companies?
But I would say, as you look at this growth, what we have now is a region that works together well. The first thing that would screw that up is if we start, and I wasn't here during the good old days, but there was, I understand, a fair amount of fighting between our government entities. That really reflects poorly on the region from a new company perspective. So I think working together, which is what you're doing right now, is very positive. As long as that continues, I think we'll see a lot of good things. Additionally, understanding and minimizing the impacts of this growth will make it more palatable to the region. I mean, for the people, and you saw the numbers, there are going to be a lot of people that have great jobs in the next 5 years that don't have them that live here right now. It's a huge opportunity for our region to upgrade. You see the average wages going up. A lot of good things are happening. But the flip side is there are people that don't like growth, don't like traffic, came here to get away from it all, and will be very vocal when it starts to impact on them. So the purpose, in large part of this effort, is to understand where this growth is going to occur and then help government, if you will, and the agencies involved there get out in front of it to a point where it doesn't become a hot button issue for certain people, and that way could affect our ability to welcome in this growth.
Because I know that the school district looking at that kind of growth, and I can see the dollar signs running through their heads to meet the demand for that, and we haven't got the ability to give them funds to build new schools right now. I peeked over at RTC, and looking at that kind of growth in the North Valleys, they know as well as I do we haven't got infrastructure to support that kind of growth in the North Valleys as far as the highway system, and we're a long ways from being there. And so at what point are we planning growth in areas that we do not have the infrastructure to support it, and it's going to choke off your ability to bring companies here?
Clearly, there's an issue with the schools and the need for capital. I mean, that's been an issue that's been on the table for 10 years. So there are efforts underway to address that, and I'm optimistic that we can get there. So from the school part, we've got work to do as a region, and if ultimately the voters decide there's some things they want to have better, for example, not build another, or I guess you build them, bring in another 600 portables classrooms, if we decide that's not something we want to do, then there are ways to fix that. From a roads perspective, there were and are plans for the North Valleys and different funding options. Clearly, if you look at the McCarran Pyramid Highway interchange, there's a plan to upgrade that in the near term. So that will help us for a while. There are other plans to look at what impacts some of that will have in the Sparks area. And then if you go up north, obviously, the 395 connection up there is pretty solid already, and there's some road upgrades that could be done that help accommodate the growth that's mostly, it looks like mostly up north, at least initially. So I think there are, while there are no blank checks, unfortunately, there are plans and there are priorities that would allow us to mitigate some of the pain.
I disagree with you about the 395 corridor. I had to take service streets to get here this morning because it was stopped. And it stops every morning between 7 and 8:30. It's 5 mile an hour down the 395 freeway from Lemon Valley all the way past the Spaghetti Bowl. So if we plan growth in that north area of the county, which your map encompasses a large part of that, that's something we're going to have a major issue with. And it does the same thing at night going north. So if we can't fix that growth up there is going to die on the vine, in my opinion. And I think that we've got other areas in the city we're going to see the same problems because we haven't stayed ahead of our projections. This is a great time to have those projections so that we could, if we're smart, we'll plan to build infrastructure to support where you're planning that industrial stuff is going to come. If we're smart, we'll plan to make improvements so we can handle that. But we haven't been that way in the past. That's why we're so far behind on Pyramid and McCarran. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Ms. Taylor.
First of all, I want to just concur that was a great presentation, great information for us to have, I think, as a community. My question is, as you project the growth, the jobs, the persons, the households, great information, how do you take numbers like that and extrapolate what that means for students? How many students are we looking? Great segue from the conversation about schools, Mike. You've been in the forefront of this. How do we get the numbers, projected number of students from those growth numbers?
Well, the school district should have, and just like all schools, they'll have their number of persons or kids per household. So they'll do kids per single-family home type households versus apartment households. So there's a factor in there. It's maybe 2 to 3 or 1.5, whatever the school district is. They'll use our numbers, hopefully, to start using, developing those forecasts for the demand for classrooms. We just went through the same process down in Southern Nevada, working with the school district and coming up with these kind of, and we had to do this hotspot analysis, where they really happen so we can, school district can buy the land to get the schools. So that was a whole challenge there. But yeah, they should have, the school district should have their metrics that they use to convert that population to school kids.
So now that we have this, numbers of projected numbers of households, we can do our work from there.
That's correct. And if I could just give you guys, hopefully not a modest proposal, a modest recommendation. If you decide to meet or to have the EPIC group stay together and meet every quarter, maybe monthly is too much right now, but at least every quarter initially, that's not a bad idea. Even if they're not producing a second report or a second phase, at least to get together and keep talking, keeping the dialogue going so that everyone knows what's going on from different perspectives. And I think it would be good to have Mike, and I'm going to volunteer you, Mike, having it done at EDON as sort of the facilitator and coordinator of this, because that keeps the dialogue going and everyone kind of understands what's happening in real time.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I have a question for Kim, because I think you have some relevance in this, Kim. And just specifically to address Mr. Lucy's comment on industrial in the county. We did an industrial needs analysis, and I believe that was published in 2011 or 12?
Actually, it was 2013.
13. Boy, time flies when you're having fun. And I'm curious as to how many of the elected officials have seen it. So what I'm asking is, would you be willing to go to each of the entities and make that presentation again, just for education purposes? Because the analysis regional planning did was excellent, and I believe that Mr. Restrepo put that into his planning part of his presentation. So the underlying part of it is how many industrial parcels we need, the sizes, and then I believe we went in as much detail as water and power and utility hookups to each one of these parcels too. So it was a very in-depth study that I don't think that everyone on this panel is aware of. So I'm just asking if you would be willing to do that.
Thank you very much. We would be happy to. Really briefly, we did do a 20-year analysis of both projected growth and the kind of a needs analysis, if you will, supply and demand of industrial land in our area, and the conversation around where that's located, how much we need, what type of services we might need, and infrastructure around that. In fact, we broke out the supply that is out there into 3 tiers based on whether or not it had services or not. We would be happy to come and speak to each of the jurisdictions about that, and we'll work with the managers to set those up. Thank you.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Absolutely. It's Kimberly Robinson with Team RPA.
Thanks, Kim. I think that's an important part of the discussion for us too. All of our industrial growth goes to Story County. That doesn't leave us any money for schools or other things that we need to do. And housing in the long term is a dead loser for the cities. So we don't want all housing and no commercial or industrial. So it needs to be carefully planned out, but I believe you have a great start on it in that program. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Ratty.
Kim, if you want to stay put, save you a few steps. Along similar lines, I'd like to hear from you as well as Mr. Restrepo and Mr. Kazimierski, just on the general concept, if it applies. So we're at unusual times, and the growth is accelerated. But we've done some planning for growth, so the industrial is a great example. It was a 20-year plan, so perhaps that 20 years just got compressed significantly, but the overall planning beneath it is still valid in terms of what the needs are for the community that just may happen more quickly. Is that your take on it?
I think that's an excellent characterization of what we're talking about here. Because when we think about how much growth, whether it's population or employment, over a 20-year period, we are indeed talking about potentially this being compressed with enhanced economic impacts. So when Mike brought everyone together to put together this report and talk about population and employment projections over the next 5 years, and potentially it being a bit more enhanced or accelerated. The idea really was, let's get some numbers around what that could look like in a little bit more compressed time frame, and be able to share that with each of the jurisdictions and the entities, so that they can think about it maybe not as over a 20-year horizon, but what might we need to do over, say, a 5-year horizon.
So here's my question based on that. So as the frenzy bears down on us as governing bodies and as elected officials, and there's so much pressure on, I need my project and I need it now because I need to make sure that I hit that ripe opportunity. And that then forces some of the discord that happens between the governing bodies, right? Are the processes that we currently use as a region to facilitate planning still appropriate given the new reality? And so what comes to mind for me is the update in 2017 of the master plan. Is that still the right process to use, even though the pace has changed, the dynamics may have changed, will our processes still serve us? And I'm interested in hearing your perspective. I'm also interested if Mr. Restrepo or Mr. Kazimierski have a perspective, as they've worked so closely with you and they represent, the private sector a bit more. So.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. I believe that the processes are effective and that they are in place. I think the timing of the 2017 regional plan update is perfectly timed with the conversation around growth. To me, we did an industrial land study. We're doing this EPIC report to talk about that enhanced growth. We've just started a residential land study. All of these things kind of flow into this discussion of building a vision of what we want our region to be and how we want that to look based on some of the changes that are out there. We understand that we are anticipating some additional growth at this point in time, but it's also projection, right? And which is why we've done about 3 different scenario projections, and what you'll find is that's in the report when this eventually gets put out there. But yes, I actually think the processes are working. I think the timing is actually perfect. And what I do see is this effort in terms of EPIC has been more collaborative in terms of discussing these types of issues than I've been engaged with before in this jurisdiction, or quite frankly in any jurisdiction I've worked in. So I think it's a really positive outcome.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, just to answer your, kind of elaborate on what Kim's saying, the other component here that we need to look at, there are going to be, with all this growth, competing interests for land. You know, the home builder is going to make a very rational argument. We need to maintain housing affordability. The only way we can maintain housing affordability in order for companies to be attracted here is to have land converted, you know, for residential use, so we keep home prices down and becomes housing prices not become a disincentive to economic growth. The commercial guys, the industrial and office, let's not forget office. That's another area that we'd run you to look at. It's not a serious concern sometimes converting from industrial to residential commercial office land, but office land is an important critical part of this process. If you're going to attract office using type of operations and they can't find enough office land, that is a challenge. So not as big of a challenge as industrial. We ought to be looking at all employment lands, and in our world, all employment lands include office and industrial. Retail is not as much of a problem. But this idea that we need to have a healthy jobs housing balance is very critical. Whether the community wants to establish actual ratios of jobs to housing unit and those sorts of things. You want to be that proscriptive like you see in other communities. That's a decision for you folks. But at least have the discussion. What do we want to be when we grow up in terms of a healthy job housing balance? How do we balance all these interests? Because it is critical. You make a wrong decision in one way or another, it could have long-term impacts both on economic growth, prosperity, and just the community livability issues. The livability is really critical in those sort of things. You can't have a livable community unless you have a healthy economy. You can't have a healthy economy without the proper balance of industrial lands and residential lands. It's got to be all work together in a very integrated, holistic, I hate to use that word, holistic way.
And Madam Chair, would you mind? Just a simple question. I thought I heard Mr. Kazimierski, you say that there should be a follow-up study about the revenue streams. Did you say that's underway, or that's something that we need to initiate? Because I do think that that's obviously a critical component. We've already heard about schools, roads. I'm going to add water and wastewater treatment to the mix. So what's the next step there as you see it?
We will have the funding streams as part of this study. In fact, we have the data. It really feeds down from jobs and population. It kind of Mr. Estrepo will get into a little bit more detail, but it's part of this effort. So,
and when do you anticipate that?
We're tweaking some numbers now. We're looking through data from the Department of Taxation and getting some per capita numbers, so to speak, that we can start multiplying against the growth. We should be done with that portion of the study in the next week, 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks. And then we're going to run it through the EPIC committee, folks, let them, critique it and look at it. And that's why it's so important that folks like Andrew Kling are involved. And so that within 2 weeks, we should have that portion.
And it's based on the tax laws of today?
Excuse me?
And it's based on the tax laws of today?
Based on the tax laws. Obviously it'll be tweaked, whatever happens at the legislature, right. Clearly. But yeah, it's based on what's in place today in terms of current tax laws.
So would we anticipate doing an update after June 1st?
Yeah, we could probably do an update at that point, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ratty. Any additional questions? Ms. Breckus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Restrepo, I want to ask you a question about something, but I want to make a general comment. I appreciate the larger kind of policy response to your presentation, because I think that's where it needs to go. In terms of a housing affordability, you made a kind of an aside comment that you said housing, housing costs are you mentioned home costs are going up, then you kind of recorrected yourself and said, excuse me, housing costs are going up. And I think that maybe is, I'd like to understand, what you meant by that. I think what maybe I'm seeing is, and we had it presented to the City Council last week, was rent burden, the nature of rent burden or housing burden is just taken a tremendous jump, and I think that's national, and that's the number of households paying in excess of 30% of their monthly income for housing, and that's really increased. And so when we have the discussions about housing and, we can expand roads out here and, the single family supply out there, I don't think that's going to get it. I think that's part of the mix, but we're starting to have discussions with the City of Reno, and I think we do have the zoning land use framework for that, but it's going to be a housing market housing mix that we have not seen here before. We're doing a contest right now on, it's called Housing for the Next Generation. We have a City of Reno owned property, and we've opened it up to all design professionals in the community to show us what this new housing is, because it's going to be different. When I back out like Tesla numbers at $25 an hour, I see if a household has 2 of those jobs, they can afford a $465,000 home, which is pretty good. You could probably, be in a pretty nice suburban development or high-end inner city neighborhood. But when I get back to what the $250,000 median home is right now, that's about a $40,000 a year income, which, that's looking at cities across the country. That's pretty good to buy the medium home at $40,000, but it's that in between that we are just starting to feel the challenges. And I want to ask your thoughts kind of on these general comments, but do you agree that housing is going to be changing the look of it at some point? And what are you seeing down in the market you study down in Vegas?
Yeah, and we're doing these kind of studies all over the Southwest. It's a great point. The growing predominance of rental housing by demand by not so much the baby boomers, but the millennials and the Gen Y, Gen X folks for more different types of living arrangements, and in some cases moving to becoming lifestyle renters, as they say. It's very critical. Part of this whole process is understanding not only the housing demand on the for sale side, but what's going to be demanded on the rental side, and tying that into the types of jobs that are going to be growing here. Obviously, the higher the income, the more propensity to buy a home is. But there's going to be a variety of other jobs that are going to grow that are secondary in nature, not the primary jobs necessarily, but the secondary jobs that may have a requirement for a different type of housing that exists today, in terms of the densities, in terms of the prices, in terms of the living arrangements. So all of this is a critical component that a lot of states, cities, and metros are dealing with right now because of the changing nature of our economy, which was driven by this recession that we just went through. It's changed the whole thing completely. For example, in my personal case, I have 2 kids. My daughter's 30, my son's 27. They don't want to buy. They want to rent. They want to rent in an urban environment. My daughter's moved back to Las Vegas from New York. She's been up there for a few years working, but she wants to get back to Nevada, and they're looking at different arrangements. So, she sent me an email the other day. I say, Dad, what's the stock of high-rise apartments in downtown Las Vegas? I'm not interested in moving into a suburb. And so that whole character of changing how consumers buy and their purchasing patterns and their purchasing preferences are really critical to this process. We need to understand that it's not just going to be suburban homes at $400,000, out in a master plan community. It's going to be high-density housing in certain locations, and maybe looking at another component, which maybe I think Kim has looked into. What is your infill development strategy? Is there an infill development plan here for the valley that you're looking at for the more urban type of housing?
Thank you. Any additional questions? Ms. Stewart.
Just a follow-up in terms of, Mr. Kazimierski, you mentioned or alluded to earlier differences of opinion amongst elected bodies about where to go, how to go, when to go. And I guess I'm just wondering what might be a next step for us, either as a body, as a joint meeting, or at regional planning governing board. Should we be undertaking kind of a joint visioning on where to put our residential, commercial, industrial, or how to address these problems that we've already identified? I mean, we don't necessarily need the whole team and the whole report to know that we sort of have a wave about to hit us based on your job projections. So I guess I'd be asking Kim and yourself and the others that have been on this EPIC team, what can we do as elected officials to smooth out this process to make sure we are of a joint mind and that we aren't getting into, differences of opinions in various forms, whether it's, TUMWA, wastewater, RTC, regional planning, and to Ms. Ratty's point about, is our regional planning process kind of set up for the future, or do we need to be doing something different? I would really like to hear from the staff about those ideas, if not now, at a future point. But if you have a comment now, I'd like to hear it.
I would just say regional planning has taken this one on already. I think John's suggestion, bring the EPIC group together on a quarterly basis to make sure we're in sync there, and then this group to talk about it on a regular basis over the coming years would be an important way to make those connections.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about something more specific. I mean, at the City of Reno, for example, we had a strategic retreat, as all of the bodies do. And we talked about where's our future, what do we want to focus on, what are the pressing issues facing us right now. And yet, a lot of those conversations were not, and they were about, actually, I think one of our priorities at the City of Reno was about improved regional planning. And I just, and I think by that we mean working together on a common framework. So thank you, Kim, for coming up.
And Kim Robinson with TMRPA. Thank you so much. I believe actually right now is a really wonderful opportunity for this body to say, you know what, this is exactly the conversation that we want to have moving forward. Given the information that was provided today, we want to engage on a consistent, engaged policy conversation about where residential, industrial, commercial, office are located so that we maximize, quite frankly, the revenues that we get from development. We can afford to continue to grow in an appropriate fashion moving forward, and we can provide the residential choices that we know the different generations will be looking for. So my recommendation, my suggestion would be that we start to talk about having, as I mentioned, a consistent meeting where we talk about these policy issues and we talk about them together.
Because, I mean, I don't think anybody wants to spout about, you know, let's have this much industrial, to Mr. Lucy's point earlier, or this much commercial, or all the houses should be out here, or we should have apartments 20 miles or 10 miles from, you know, the downtown core of either Sparks or Reno, or from Story County. You know, I don't know how to move that dialogue forward, and I'm hoping that you as a staff will give us some very concrete ways to get there, because, I mean, just looking at my colleagues, I mean, I don't think that we want to repeat any of the conversations of the past. I think we want to have a new kind of conversation. So, and to your point, Mr. Restrepo, about your daughter, we're hearing that at Reno too. They want something different. A millennial generation is looking for different options, whether they're in their 30s or even heading to the early 40s, about where do they want to raise their kids and what environment. And that's one reason our Midtown's been so successful. The people like to be where businesses are, walking, biking, that kind of thing. And so, you know, I think at some point we have to stop talking so globally and kind of actually roll up the sleeves and get to work on what we want this region to look like and where we want to grow. So.
Just add one thing what I should mention is, you know, at the other edge of the age spectrum is what's happening with the wave of retiring baby boomers and the types of housing choices they're going to need to make as they age into different types of living arrangements. So that's another critical component. So you have growth on both ends right now. Growth of the workforce population, which is critical to the spike in the economic activity, and then the aging of the population.
Well, and I know just in my ward, I've had numerous proposals for different kinds of retirement living and actually assisted living. You know, I've had about 4 of those projects proposed in the last couple months. So, and I don't know if others are experiencing those kind of demands as well, and Sparks and so on. So I definitely hear you on that. And they're wanting something different. You know, I mean, there's the age and place thing, but there's also the, could I be with like people while I'm still healthy? You know, and kind of pool resources. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions? Thank you. Wonderful report. Really appreciate all the efforts gone into it. Looking forward to seeing the financial, the remaining small portion that will be coming out. And really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting us help you guys. Appreciate it.
No public comment?
No, I have no one signed yet.
Okay. Then we will close item 5 and move to item 6. Comments from the councils, the commissions, the boards, and the managers. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. About 2 concurrent meetings ago, I asked to save a spot for the RTC at these meetings. We have major projects going on right now. Veterans Parkway, Pyramid McCarran, 4th Street Prater Way project, not to mention North Virginia Street, where we're going to pour over $250 million into this community in a very short time. I've also asked, and we talk about competing interests for land, I've asked the RTC to lead a study, not only in Washoe County, but with the surrounding counties, on further defining the I-11 route. When we're talking about people looking for land and we let them build wherever they want to, and then we try to bring this I-11 up through the county, we could have some problems. It just raises the cost on everything we do. So I would like to see them on the agenda The next one is October 31st, or August 31st, I believe. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Anybody else have comments, questions? Mr. Lucy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just kind of to carry on with our discussion that we were having previously in regards to economic development. I think I believe the county, we have discussed an issue in regards to going back and looking at regional planning, the governing board, and having some discussions in regards to economic development. And I think this is a perfect forum in which to do something of that nature. And I'd like to bring it back that in a future agenda item that we can have that discussion of some sort and look at how it's going to directly affect our economic development within the region and the ability for the bodies to do so. It sounds like there are concerns out there from members in regards to the ability to put industrial and commercial in proper areas, and just like Mr. Councilman Smith said, that there are some issues that we need to do conjointly with a number of the boards, such as RTC, Regional Planning, EDAWN, and work together and kind of find some solutions going forward for the region. But because I think we are at that precipice of some major development within the area, and that needs to be a topic of discussion soon.
Thank you, Mr. Lucy. Ms. Jardin.
Thank you very much. And I would concur with Councilmember Smith that it's unfortunate that we didn't have somebody from RTC presenting with regards to infrastructure and the importance of it as we try to reach this growth in our region. I would also ask that at our next meeting that a representative from Tumwa coordinate on the presentation. I think we all need to better understand the water supply, the water needs, and how, with the growth that we're having, how we're going to get there, both from a new development standpoint as well as an existing residential and commercial standpoint. I think it's critical that Tumwa be a part of our next conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Jardin. Mr. Hartung.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow up on what Ms. Jardin just said, I think that that's an excellent idea, but I'd also like to talk about wastewater at the same time. Look at what our needs are, how that's going to fit back into the puzzle, and we know that we're very close to being at maximums, and what are we going to need in the future, and how are we going to fund it as a region? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Breckus.
To add to the fun we could have in August, I'd like to have a little discussion about thinking about the root causes for why we have regional conflict among our different jurisdictions. I think that would be very helpful. We all know that there was, under the fire issue and the bill that came down this session, some disagreement in positions between the city and the county. And I think rather than talking of is it fire, is it this road investment project, these capacity issues of the plant, really understanding what are the root causes. Is it a race for the ratables? Is it community character? Is it a fragmented governance structure? I'd like to have a little discussion and thinking about that, because I don't think that's we've all taken a step back and had a thought that way. I know when they go into international peace negotiations, they have ground rules and common understandings, and I think that might be a useful discussion to have at this level at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Breckus. Additional comments? In that case, I will make a comment. I think it's to our credit that we, as four governing bodies in this case, sit here without hitting each other over the head. We get along fairly well. We have a good working relationship for the most part. But there are some things that need to be talked about, and I hope that we will be doing that as we get together, not just with this group, but also with regional planning. I know the county has some issues, as Mr. Lucy indicated, some concerns about things that need to be perhaps looked at with regional planning, and I know we have we have asked for a presentation from our staff to the commission, and perhaps that this group at the next meeting in August, it might be appropriate to have a presentation to this group where we just kind of have the opportunity to discuss regional planning a little bit. on a going forward basis, it's probably my number one agenda as a commissioner to have a strong working relationship with both cities. And that includes the school district now, as we're trying to work together as a team, all of us together, because the growth that's coming, that these two gentlemen have just pointed out to us so clearly, the growth that's coming is going to be incumbent upon all of us to work as a team. And so that's really kind of one of my major focuses, and I hope that I can count on everybody else to work with me, so I appreciate the time. And with that, we will close 6. We have a final public comment. Madam Clerk?
I have no one signed in.
Okay. Certainly.
The next meeting is scheduled in August. Is that how long it takes to get the information back and for the different jurisdictions to kind of digest the data in an appropriate amount of time? I just feel as though if there's an opportunity to meet before then, that we should. If we can, I guess I would ask from some of the folks in the room how long it would take for staffs to kind of go through the data presented today and be able to convene. I'd like to meet sooner than August.
Thank you, Ms. Jardin. That's a valid point. I think that perhaps we could, Ms. Breckus, just one moment, perhaps we could ask our 3 managers to, I'm sorry.
Bound to happen, though.
Wrong side, Ms. Ratty. Hang on just a moment. Perhaps we could ask our 3 managers to get together and look and see if we can't move this meeting up to a sooner time. Sorry, Jenny. Sorry, Julia.
Okay.
Ms. Ratty.
I'm going to, again, and I think that there have been processes that have served us over time, and that we should use those processes. And again, there's great urgency, there's great activity, but the process that has served us well in terms of setting up joint meetings is to get the 2 mayors and the chair in the room, because there was about 12 hours worth of topics that were just thrown out there. And it's not going to be productive to do 12 hours worth of topics, but we have good leaders at each jurisdiction. I have faith in my leader. I assume that the rest have faith in theirs as well. So I would suggest that we kick it back to you all. And if we're going to get something on the calendar, get it on sooner rather than later. But what has happened is when we've tried to do sooner, we don't get good turnout because it's not on people's calendars. Right. So I trust you to figure that out with the managers and help us move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Ratty. I appreciate it. Any other comments? Okay, we have no public comment, so do I have a motion to adjourn? All those in favor? We are adjourned.